Hi, and I'm very excited. You can see I've got a slightly gleeful face today, not just because I'm in Hawaii, my favourite place, but because I'm talking to probably one of my, definitely one of my favourite authors in the world, Robert Greene. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you for having me, Owen.
Robert is the author of the 48 Laws of Power, 33 Strategies of War, the Art of Seduction, is it?
Yes.
Yep, the 50th Law, all of which I've read several times, and
Ah,
now the brand new book, Mastery, which is probably my favourite subject ever. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, I've always got like 5 books on the go. I was like, right, put all those to one side. This is my top priority. So
yeah.
very excited to have you here. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you for having me, Owen. My pleasure.
And I'm really excited to talk to you today about the whole topic of mastery. And
Yeah.
as I said to you just before the pre-interview, I'm only halfway through the book, but it's already given me so much insight.
Mm,
And I felt like, wow, I really have to share this with people. A lot of people who are watching this will be people who are interested in health and energy and
right.
living up to a life of their fullest potential. And
Right.
can I just ask you, what made you decide to write a book about mastery this time?
Well, I've been researching for years, lots of powerful people in different fields and politics and business and sports and every aspect. And I've noticed that it's contrary to the myth that people are just sort of born this way. I kept coming up with evidence that that's just not true at all. That even in the most successful people that you would think were born that way, like a Mozart or an Einstein, that it's not. It's a process that any human being has to go through in order to master a subject, whether it's war or science. And so, partly out of the annoyance with this conception that people are born brilliant or a genius, I wanted to write a book that would debunk that and show that actually, in fact, anybody can reach this level of intelligence, but it takes time, effort, hours of practice, and actually a great love for what you're doing. So I wanted to sort of share that with the public and kind of debunk some of these myths out there.
I was particularly interested about the scientific basis that you had for that in modern neuroscience as well. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, it's a very complex subject, and I go into it in a fair amount of detail. I mean, the one of the main things that interested me, and one of the people I interviewed for the book is a neuroscientist, V.S. Ramachandran, is that the neuroscience is discovering now how incredibly plastic the human brain is. So it used to be the concept 30 years ago that pretty much we were hardwired at birth for certain capabilities, and that the brain was wired this way, and that there was very little room for any kind of changes that would happen. And then slowly they've been discovering that this is not true, and they're almost discovering the opposite, that the brain is incredibly plastic and that it can develop in all sorts of directions, and that essentially you kind of create the landscape of the brain that you want. And so if you're lazy and you don't do anything and you play video games and you're not connected to learning anything, just like a muscle, the brain tends to atrophy and you get an environment that's very, there's no connections going on. It's like an ecosystem that's dying. But if you're learning a lot of things, if you're playing the piano or chess, so even London cab drivers, they found, have these richly connected brains because of all of the navigating they have to do. If you're exercising the brain, you get a much different landscape. And I call it a kind of a momentum that you develop. Once you learn skills, it's easier to learn more skills. It's a muscle that needs constant development. And I essentially, on the other aspect, I wanted to look at how the human brain evolved millions of years ago as an instrument for bringing us intelligence, consciousness, rationality, so that I could show when I'm talking about mastery in the present, this is something that evolved over so much deep time that there's no way you can refute what I'm talking about. There's no way you can think, well, I can take a drug, I can have this piece of technology, and I can bypass that process that people have to go through in order to learn something. No, this is the brain that you were given. It's a machine designed for learning skills through repetition, through practice, through observing other people. It takes time. There are no shortcuts. So shut up and and stop trying to find the shortcuts and learn about mastery.
Mm. And how would you define mastery then? Because I think it's a term that is thrown around a lot these days.
Yeah.
Masterminds and mastery and this mastery and wealth mastery and all the rest of it. And then it's like a weekend course or something like that. That's not the kind of mastery you're talking about, right?
No, basically what I'm talking about is, you might have heard of the 10,000 hour concept, which is a pretty brilliant concept. And what's so brilliant about it is they've been able to demonstrate that after that amount of time practicing at chess or music or sports or whatever, the brain literally goes through a qualitative change. We can notice an incredible difference in performance, in predicting ability, in intelligence once you pass that threshold. Well, I'm saying when you go even further and you go towards 15,000 hours or even 20,000 hours, the brain moves to an even higher level, and you have what I call high level intuition. You have complete command of the field that you're involved in. And with that complete command, it's almost at your fingertips. You don't even have to think very hard. Ideas come to you. You can sense what's going to happen in the next few years in your field. You can see trends before other people. You can make discoveries about the world that nobody else is seeing. That is mastery, and it's the highest thing we can achieve. And I show people in history, but I also have contemporary examples. So it's not something that it's just an Einstein. I have architects and artists, etc., who have passed that threshold of the 15 to 20,000 hours.
And would you say that is this only defined by a single skill or set of skills, or would you say it's almost like an attitude towards life? Like Leonardo da Vinci, once he had spent those 20,000 hours, would he then have that same attitude of mastery to something else, like exercise, or would it? Basically, what I'm saying is, do we end up being super specialized but useless at everything else if we're into mastery, or do we actually end up being better at everything else that we put our hand to as well?
Well, there are different paths, and everybody has a different brain that has a different configuration. And some people, Albert Einstein pretty much specialized in physics, and that's what he mastered by the age of 36, etc. Leonardo da Vinci had a more kind of polymath type brain, and he wanted to explore all the different fields. I think the more modern form of mastery is going to go in the direction where people learn several skills and then find how to combine them into something unique, a new way of doing things. I have an example in the book of a woman who studies electrical engineering and robotics, and then she got interested in neuroscience. Now she combined those fields into what she calls new robotics, which is connecting robotics with actual neuroscience, so people can have a prosthetic hand that connects to the brain. That's more what we're looking at in the future because we have so much information at our access. But there's a debate in the neuroscience community whether learning a skill in one area makes it easier to learn a skill in another area, and I think it's quite clear that it does.
Mm.
So you develop it's not an obvious connection. Learning Latin is not going to help you necessarily be a better skier. I mean, there are things that we can't really cross, but the ability to be patient, to know that through practice something good is going to come, and if it's a sport, learning how to that way that mind and the hand interact can translate to another sport. Some of them do really cross, but I maintain in general the ability to master a skill brings you a kind of self-mastery, a
Mm.
patience, a slowness that you can now apply to almost anything. And I've done it in my life where now if there's something I haven't conquered, I know it's going to take time, but I know that I trust myself that I can do it.
And so, would you say that in that case, it can be easier to take on those new challenges then, right? If a person has mastered a series of skills, if they are a polymath, like you say, because I'm trying to look at for everyone watching this, like, what's the benefit? I mean, it's a lot of hard work. Talking about 20,000 hours. That's what, like 20 years, something like that, right? um,
Well, yeah.
what are the benefits of it? Does that mean that once you get to that stage, then you can feel confident that you have the discipline and the patience and the fortitude of mind that?
Well, it's a huge question, but it's silly that people ask that question because first of all, I make the point in the beginning of the book that you have to choose a field that excites you in a deep way,
Mm.
that you're passionate about, that connects with you emotionally and personally. I have a very good reason for going into that. So when you choose a field, like for me, writing, it doesn't feel as it doesn't feel boring or tedious. You're excited by what you're learning. So that's a key point. The brain doesn't learn nearly as well if it's not motivated. When you're in a country, like if you're traveling and you have to learn a foreign language and your girlfriend is speaking that foreign language, you're going to learn it a lot faster than if you're bored in a classroom in the United States somewhere. Motivation is a key thing. So if you're excited about your field, you learn faster. And I talk about this cycle of accelerated returns that you enter. So when you're learning something and you get better at it, it's more fun, and then you practice harder, and then it gets more fun, and then you practice even harder, and it goes round and round and round until you in 5 or 6 years you have incredible skill. Getting to that point after 5 or 6 or 7 years where you have incredible skill is such a powerful, great feeling. You feel confident in yourself. You know you can do it again. You have your self-esteem takes a huge lift. It's a great feeling. So the notion that this is 20 years of, oh my God, I can't go through that, nonsense. It's a very pleasurable process, and it makes you feel really good. By the time you're entering the 10th year, you're not sitting there thinking, oh God, I got another 10 years before I get to master. You're already at a very high level. You're very creative. The feeling of suddenly getting creative after 10 years of studying something is another fantastic feeling. Ideas are coming to you out of nowhere. Your brain is challenged. You're not bored. You know, this is the notion that something has to be immediately pleasurable. No, this is not like watching a television show. Mastery, it does require dealing with boredom, dealing with moments where you don't know if you can make it or not. So if for the people who need instant gratification, mastery is not for them. But the process itself and the power it brings you and the money it will bring you and everything else is, if you don't think it's worth it, then you shouldn't be listening to this show.
Yeah, that's probably right. What about for people who are totally on board? They're like, yes, this does resonate with me. It resonates deep inside me, but I just don't know what it is for me yet. Would you give them any kind of advice on that? Again, I know you cover it a lot in the book, but
Well, it depends on where you are in life. If you're 18 or 19, it would really, really help for you to read that first chapter and get a sense of, okay, I don't know exactly what I want, but I know more or less things that interest me and excite me. You sort of head in that direction in a career path in which you can explore. I tell people your 20s should be for exploring. You don't have to know exactly what you want. You should be learning skills, finding what you don't like and what you do like, generally within the path that suits, that meshes with, that what I call primal inclinations that people have, that those subjects that excited you when you were very young. If you can do that and you can explore, you're going to find your way towards things that work for you. If you're older, if you're like in your 30s, it's never too late. I didn't start writing my first book until I was about 36. It's never too late. It's more a question of, was I spending my 20s learning some skills, or was I just sitting around smoking pot? If you were just sitting around smoking pot, well, okay, we can do some things, but it's a little harder. If you were doing something and learning skills, it's what you want to do is you want to take what you've learned and find a way to adapt it and do something different, closer towards your life's task or what you were meant to do. If you studied law and you don't like law, but you want to be a writer, you quit law as soon as you can and you start writing about legal issues. You combine the two. You don't give up one, and then you'll slowly find your way into maybe just writing itself. If you're in your 40s, it's now you've got to basically people have to get in touch with who they are. And I talk in the book that everyone's born unique. You're born with a brain that's wired differently, with a DNA that's different, and there's something about you that's different than anybody else. Also, your experiences in life make you different. And you've got to connect with that. If you look at anybody who's powerful, who has success, we can basically say they're one of a kind. You can't tell me that there's another Steve Jobs out there. He's irreplaceable. There's only one like him. That's what happens to masters, because they take what's unique about them and they go all the way with it, and they mine that into some kind of business or idea that's can't nobody else can do. So that's where power lies, and you have to be able to know and not be afraid of what makes you unique and bring that out in your business or whatever it is.
Absolutely. So one of the main things that you're talking about, one of the main benefits is like power, basically, right? And that's a word that scares a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people have negative associations with it. I remember once I took a book out of the library, a Tony Robbins book called Unlimited Power, like 5 years ago, and the guy says, "Oh, do you want to be the next Hitler?" It's like
Yeah.
Tony Robbins. I'm like, wow, that's his association: power, Hitler. So and yet in the kind of self-development world, the world empowered generally does have, you know, positive connotations. If you're empowered, that's good. If you're seeking power, that's bad. It's like,
Right.
okay, not quite sure how that works. What's your definition of power? What would you say is like the healthy version of power? Because you talk about some of the unhealthy versions of power in the 48 Laws of Power, right, where it kind of undoes the person in the end. What would you say
Yeah.
is like a healthy pursuit of power?
Well, there's no sort of mastery or power without self-mastery. So my definition of power includes people who have self-control. So we never have complete self-control. We're very emotional creatures. We can't control circumstances and the people around us, but we can, to some degree, know who we are and control those aggressive or tendencies that get us into trouble. Anger, for instance. It's not that you repress anger, which is equally bad, but you learn how to channel it in a positive way. So my version of power wouldn't include a Hitler or a Stalin, because these are people who are deeply emotional and they're very flawed by that. A Stalin is extremely paranoid and can't control his paranoia. And sure, he was powerful for many years, but it's never a power that's going to last, and it makes him deeply miserable. The people I'm profiling, some are not, but many of them are, those who I think they're very ambitious, definitely, and I don't think there's anything wrong with the word ambition. We wouldn't be here talking on a computer with all this marvelous technology if it weren't for all sorts of ambitious people in the past who invented the electric light, who invented electricity, etc. So that's what I would tell your idiotic librarian who said, it will, you know, but so but I want people to come to terms with the fact that they do want power. And I find the worst are those people who are very hypocritical, who say, "Oh, it's all ugly, and why do you want that kind of thing? And it's all egotistical." Every human being wants a sense of control over their circumstances to some degree. It's an incredibly miserable feeling to feel that you can't control anything in your life, and I think it really warps a human being. So come to terms with the fact that you want this, and that you want it in a positive way. You want to channel it in something where you're actually using your energy to create and contribute to society, and stop being so hypocritical and some of the things that are involved in power can be a little on the dark side, which I explore in some of my books. A lot of it you're not going to want in your own life. You're going to be aware of other people doing it. But sometimes you have to play hardball, you know? Sometimes you're dealing with the Republicans in Congress. Learn how to be kind of a nasty negotiator. That's just how life is. So I guess I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, I think you are, definitely.
Okay.
So we've got to face life as it is, right? Not as we wish it to be. That's one
More
of
or
the key
less.
things. And
Yeah.
we wish that we were already empowered and didn't want power, but the reality is that as human beings, we do inevitably want control over ourselves, control over our environment to some degree. We don't
Yeah.
want to feel completely helpless. We don't want to feel at the mercy of the elements, and we just got to kind of accept that. Is that what I'm hearing you saying?
Yes, very much so. There's the expression "power corrupts" and "absolute power corrupts" absolutely, but then Malcolm X came back with "absolute powerlessness corrupts even more." So
That's
people who
good.
have people who are no power end up coming in other ways. I mean, we all know those who are passive aggressive in life. They're all around us. probably that librarian that you met with is a very passive aggressive person who's trying to get power in kind of negative ways. So you're either going to try and get it in a negative way, playing all kinds of manipulative games that disguise the fact that you're after power, or you're going to be a little more honest with yourself.
So, Robert, do you mind sharing a little bit about your own story in regards to what brought you to this interest in sharing with the world about power, about mastery?
Well, I started, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know what I wanted to write. So, in school and university and after, I thought maybe I'd write a novel or fiction. And then I got into journalism, and that didn't really suit me. And then I wandered around Europe, and I did many different jobs. I worked as a teacher in English and in Barcelona. I worked at a hotel in Paris as a receptionist. I dug ditches in Greece. And I worked for a television company in London. I just was living and experiencing things and trying to write. And I came back to Los Angeles and got into Hollywood, but that wasn't a good fit. And in all of those years, 12, 14 years of all these different jobs with different kinds of people, I had noticed a lot of things about power games, about what makes someone successful, why oftentimes people who are very talented and creative don't get very far in life because they have terrible people skills. They're horribly naive. They think that just being creative and charming is good in life, and then they get exploited. I'd seen so much of this that in 1995 I was asked by a man, we were in Italy at the time, if I had any book ideas, and I just sort of improvised my idea about the 48 Laws of Power, which built on all of my knowledge of history, because I read a lot about history, and all of my experiences with the various power games I had witnessed in life. And my idea was I was going to expose it to the world.
Mm.
This is what powerful people use. I've seen it in journalism, television, Hollywood, in cafes in Greece where I wash dishes. Everybody. I'm going to show everyone what it's like, okay? And you can decide what you hate about it, what you love about it. It's up to you. But I'm sick of people not discussing the power games that operate in this world, and that's been my philosophy for the other books. The Art of Seduction, which is a form of power. People talk about seduction, but nobody really discusses how it happens and why we humans are so easily seduced. And warfare, there's all these brilliant strategies out there and things like the art of war, but no one makes a connection between that and our personal life, which is often resembles a battlefield or war. So I've always wanted to kind of reveal things that I don't think people are talking about.
And so it seems to me, if anything, more than the love of power, what drives you forward, the common denominator of everything, is a love of truth. Would you agree with that?
That's a good way of putting it. I think so. I mean, so for instance, I decided to take on the subject of mastery, and my ideas. I don't start with a preconceived notion. I mean, I have a few ideas that I think are guiding me, such as the idea that I believe the human brain is plastic. But if I read books that tell me it's not, that's fine. I'll go with what the literature says. But my idea is I want to nail this phenomenon of mastery. I have here an example of Napoleon Bonaparte, who's vastly superior in strategy. I'm going to figure out why. Okay, so I'm going to explain to people where this power comes from, and I'm going to get at the truth, as you put it, or the reality. No matter how long it takes, no matter how many hours I have to put in, I don't want to have a book that's bullshit or that tells people, "Oh, you could have mastery in 2 years or something." I'm going to give you the truth as I see it. So yeah, I think you're right. I think that is one of my main motivations.
Something I relate to. And so I wonder, Robert, one of the questions I get a lot from clients is who feel the same is why the majority of people seem to be so scared of truth, why they seem to avoid it at all costs, or why they seem to avoid reality at all costs. I was wondering if you have any theories on that or anything from neuroscience which gives you any kind of perspective on that.
Well, it's a theme that goes back thousands of years in our history of people laziness. We all have a lazy streak. I have a lazy streak, and it's in overcoming that, because I maintain mastery. You require resistance in life. You require people that are in your path. You require having to overcome your own problems. That's what makes you stronger. That's what will make you a master. So we all have a procrastinating, lazy streak. It's human nature for various reasons. And the other reason I think it happens, and is maybe even stronger today, is that we have the technology around us gives us the impression that everything can come quickly and fast and easily. We're not aware of what a horrible hard grind it was for our ancestors to create civilization out of nothing, to build roads, to create electricity, all the things that we take for granted. So we see a world around us, we enter a world around us where there's so much power, and we don't understand the hard work that goes into it. So we're disconnected from the sense of process. And that's what I'm trying to reconnect you with, is that in order to make something, to build a bridge, write a book, run a business, it requires a step-by-step process of learning, developing skills, and making that great business or book. And I want to connect you with it and make you understand what that process is, and how much fun it can be. I forgot what your question was.
Why do people avoid the truth and avoid reality? And is there a biochemical basis for it?
So, the other reason, so people want the fairy tale. They naturally want the fairy tale that I can have something for nothing. And I talk about that in the 48 Laws of Power, all the years of alchemy and the charlatans in the Renaissance and Middle Ages, always appealing to people's desire to have a quick fix. It's deeply rooted in human nature to think I can get money really quickly, health with some drops. It goes back hundreds of years. It's not anything new. And there are always charlatans who are going to appeal to that and write books like The Secret, which might have some value to it. I'm not saying it doesn't, but that promise you this incredible power at no cost. It's deeply appealing and seductive to us all. My God, I could read a book and all of a sudden power is just going to be coming to me. Well, why not? That's sort of why. But you need to wise up and not be someone who's naive, and understand that there's no free lunch, that nothing comes easily in life, that you have to work for anything, and that when someone's peddling you a shortcut, they're almost certainly a charlatan.
Absolutely. Do you think there's actually more? Do you think there's a resurgence recently? Like there's more of a taste for the truth or reality than there was before, because we're so starved for it. I mean, I'm putting out a message out there about it's hard work, and if you want to be healthy, it doesn't happen overnight, and all the rest of it. And it seems like I'm actually finding an audience for that. It's not like just universally ignored. Do you think that there is? And the fact that you sold as many books as you have, I mean, it's astonishing, right? It's fantastic.
I agree with you. I think there is a movement, particularly among young people. I think they're sick of this kind of hyper reality TV world, all hype and nonsense. And I think we're seeing younger people who are more practical minded, who want to learn skills, who want to be good at what they do, want to make money or whatever it is. And also, I think we're facing a future where there's it's really going to be tough out there. It's a globalized environment. It's extremely competitive. It's not what it was 15 years ago. If you enter any business now, you're not just competing with people in your city or your country. You're dealing with a globalized environment. It's really tough. And we have so many problems we have to solve with the environment, etc., that it's a future for people who are practical, sober-minded, have their feet on the ground, and who understand that nothing comes cheaply. I mean, if you've ever gone into physical exercise, I like to exercise. I exercise every day. You know that the more you exercise, the better you get at it, and the better you feel. Why wouldn't that be the same for anything else in life? That's the paradigm for anything. The longer you work at something, the better you get, the better you feel, the more confident you feel. So, I once again forgot your question.
That's okay. So, have you had to do your own health mastery journey yet, Robert, or has your health been impeccable without any intervention up until now?
Well, that's a great question. So for years I exercise every day because I need it's my greatest de-stressor. But
Mm.
about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I developed a health issue. Working on the war book, it was so stressful,
Mm.
it was so difficult that I developed a really nasty digestive problem with an overrunning of bacteria in my digestive tract. And I went to doctors and they tried antibiotics, tried all kinds of tests, got me on certain diets that would help a little bit, but it wouldn't solve the problem. And I lived with this for 6 years, and I had to keep limiting my diet. I can't eat this, I can't eat that. And I was getting really frustrated. It was really lowering the pleasure I had in eating itself. And then my girlfriend found out about this diet in Los Angeles, this man named McCombs, Jeff McCombs, who has a plan for getting rid of overgrowth of yeast in your digestive tract.
Mm.
But it's very rigorous. It takes 4, 5, 6 months of work where
Mm.
you have to limit your diet, take supplements. Anyway, I went through it, and it was not fun in the beginning, particularly. But I tell you, I cleared up my problem in 5 months to the point where I have a totally new digestive tract. I can eat anything. I'm like the happiest man on the planet. I can like dancing. I was in London and I could eat spicy Indian food, which I couldn't have for years, and I loved it. But the moral of the story was all the quick fixes, the drugs, the vitamins, none of it worked. It was just masquerading. I had to go through 5 months of a really strict diet. I had to follow something that was not easy, and I had to take these supplements, and it worked. And it seems to me like that's the model for so many things in life, particularly health.
Mm.
You can almost cure anything if you're going to, beyond things like cancer or whatever, if you take the time, if you're patient and you go through a diet or regimen or whatever is necessary.
Absolutely, that's great. Consistent action. And what was it that kept you going at it? What kept you doing it? Whereas, again, most people who start 6 months courses like that, they give up with, as soon as they start to feel worse, they give up pretty quickly. What was it that kept you going easily?
Well, I tell people once you've learned that this kind of process works generally, then you have faith. I had faith that it would work. And if it didn't, okay, I would know probably within 2 months, 3 months that it wasn't working, and I would abandon it maybe. Um, but I was kind of so tired of the problem that I was willing to try. It worked for my girlfriend, and it made sense. There was a lot of science behind it. Essentially, it's a diet that totally restricted any kind of sugar entering your system,
Mm.
and that meant no alcohol and no desserts and no fruit juices. And knowing the science behind it, I said, okay, that really makes sense. That's pretty radical. That if that doesn't work, then I'm just going to have to live with this the rest of life. But the feeling, I'll tell you, I people used to always say, oh, you need to take probiotics to clean out your gut years ago, and I would try probiotics, and they would make my stomach 1,000 times worse because I was simply adding more bacteria to my digestive tract. After 8 weeks of this plan, you have to take probiotics, heavy doses of it. I
Mm.
took my probiotic. Well, I had no reaction to it. I could see right away that it was like re-engineering my digestive tract. And I'm actually at the point now where if somebody is telling me that they can fix something in 2 weeks, I don't even believe it. The fact that he was saying it was going to take months was something that actually convinced me to try it.
That's a great tip. Okay, so if you've got a major problem, then and anyone offers to fix it in less than 6 months, they are almost certainly lying.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but be suspicious.
Yeah, sorry, that's me saying that, not you. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Um,
Exactly.
do you mind outlining the process of mastery for us, Robert, in relation to the
Yep.
book? What's step one, step two, step three? And everyone watching this right now, by the way, just think to yourself, what position am I on? And if you're just on step one, that's not a problem, right? As long as you know where you're at, it's all good.
Well, the initial step is discovering is reassessing who you are and figuring out what you're calling in life. Because I maintain if you have no sense of where you're headed, you have no direction, it's very hard to enter the process. You're not going to be focused enough. It's going to be hard for you to learn. So you've got to master that. You've got to have some sense of what you were meant to accomplish in this life or what you're good at. With that in mind, you then enter the apprenticeship phase. And basically, what I'm saying there is you learn things from your parents and from school. Now just throw all of that in the trash can. It's meaningless. It's useless. Now you're entering the real world, and the real world, that's your real education. And that's what I call your apprenticeship. It usually can take anywhere from 5 to 10 years, depending on who you are and what you're doing. And in that period, I show you how you have to learn the proper mindset that you need for a good apprenticeship. I call it the ideal apprenticeship. And for instance, a common mistake that people make is they think that what's important is to make a lot of money, to be charming and have people like them, to get attention, etc. And really the main thing in your apprenticeship phase is to learn. You're a sponge. You want to learn from everybody around you, particularly mentors, which is an important part of the apprenticeship phase, and I have a chapter on it. You just want to absorb all of the lessons and things going on around you, the power games, the political aspect, the skills that are necessary. You want to practice those skills. You just want to spend that period learning and accumulating as many skills and experiences as possible. And if you do, the apprenticeship is like a foundation of a great house, and without a good apprenticeship, you can't build on anything. So this is like the key moment in your life. It's like your turning point. And so, as I said before, part of it is learning with mentors, and then there's the aspect of what I call social intelligence, which I have a whole chapter on. Wherever you are, you have to work with people, and I'm going to show you how you can learn how to read people better, how you can discover who the sharks are out there and how to avoid being eaten by them, and things like that. Once you've accumulated enough experience in that apprenticeship phase, I then tell you...
Sorry, Rob, can I just stop you there? So is this apprenticeship phase, would that be in your 20s? Or is the 20s where you're finding what you want to do and then the apprenticeship phase is like in your 30s? What's the ideal model?
The ideal model is your 20s are your apprenticeship phase.
They are, right, got it.
So for instance, I have this man, Paul Graham, who's a great Silicon Valley entrepreneur who started a business that's now worth about $5 billion. And Paul Graham went to Harvard and got a PhD in computer engineering, but he hated it. And he in Harvard learned lots of computer skills, but he was really a hacker at heart. He liked hacking more than anything. And he was so fed up with Harvard that he decided to do consulting jobs in software, and he hated that. And so he decided he was going to go learn to be an artist and a painter, and he gave up the computer. He's still in his 20s. And so he goes and he does that, and he's really serious about it, and he's living in New York. And then he decides he needs to make money, and he hears on the radio an ad for Netscape. This is in the 90s, saying that in the future people are going to be buying everything online. And he decided he was going to build the first application program that would allow you to set up a business online. What I'm trying to say is he spent his 20s learning all of these skills, these computing skills, these software skills. Even painting was an important skill that taught him about craftsmanship and doing something slowly and well and having a great attention to detail. He didn't know what he wanted to do. He was wandering, but he accumulated skills in subjects that excited him. And when that opportunity came to him when he was 30 years old, he then was ready for it, and he developed this program which ended up selling to Yahoo for $50 million, it was a huge success, and it set him off this path. So to me, that's a model for a lot of young people where it's almost a hacker model, where you're hacking your way to your career. You don't know really what you want, but you're trying things out. You're experimenting, always experimenting with things that you love. So it's your 20s that's your apprenticeship. It's a period where you're not wasting time, you're learning things, you're having fun, exploring these different subjects, and then something will come from all of that. Other paths can be you know what you want in your 20s, and you don't have to do all of that. You know you want to be a doctor or whatever. That's a different path. But you can't avoid an apprenticeship phase. There's no shortcut. There's no way to go from knowing your life's task to being creative and being a master. You need that 5 or 10 years. There's no way of avoiding it. It's just you can go in a different direction depending on who you are.
You talked about the importance of having a mentor during that phase, and you said ideally a live mentor, right? For many
Right.
years, for me, I had just books, basically as my mentors, and then I started to have people on my computer screen when I finally got a laptop in my mid-20s, and then
Uh-huh.
I actually started to have people live and in person. Even now, I spend probably quite a large proportion of my money making sure that I actually go and spend time with these people who, to me, are role models.
Right.
Would you say that's even more important this day and age, where we're more kind of in one way connected, but another way isolated with each other, technology, to actually spend literal time with those people who are your mentors?
Most definitely. I mean, if you can't do it, if you're living in Alaska or whatever, and you physically can't get to it, or you're in prison or whatever it is, you do the best you can, and you work with books, and you do virtual things, and it can be pretty good.
Hmm.
And I talk in the book about Thomas Edison. Is probably the one example of a great master who really never had a real life mentor.
Okay.
But you don't want to follow that path unless it's forced on you. And the reason is the human brain is designed to learn by observing other people. That's how we spent millions of years learning how to make tools, how to build things out of stone or clay or wood or whatever material, is watching the master craftsman working with his hands and then observing that and then imitating it. We're built for learning by watching other people doing things and also from hearing from them. That person to person connection where you actually absorb their energy, see them at work, is an incredibly powerful model. Like there's examples of a tennis instructors who have the most brilliant serve, and they try and tell the student, this is how you have to do your serve, and it doesn't quite work. But the moment they see it, the body, with its mirror neurons, with its ability to imitate, picks up the cues and can imitate it brilliantly. So we're designed for that. The other thing is a mentor in the flesh and blood can see you at work and can say, these are your weak spots. These, I can see right now that you really don't understand this subject. Your skill level is weak. You're not good in dealing with people on this level. With that immediate interaction, and they're able to watch you at work, they can give you feedback that will help you do what's called deliberate practice. They will be able to show you the areas that you need to practice at.
Hmm.
Most people tend to practice things that they're already good at. The trick in life is to practice things that you're not good at. Um, Mentors can pick that out. They can give you criticism and feedback in the present, and they can tell you, look, you don't. This is a path that you don't want to follow. They can help you avoid wasting your time taking this other route for a year or two. So it's an incredibly powerful way of learning, and it's the only thing I say that can actually save you time in the path to mastery. There are no shortcuts, but a good mentor can streamline the process and get you going a little bit faster on that path.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm so glad that I learned that lesson when I did. And even though, as you say, I still had to put the years in to get where I am now, and I'm only 32, but I've been kind of studying self development since I was 19, so I'm getting in that place,
Wow.
not of mastery maybe, but of whatever that intermediate stage is. In fact, that leads us on perfectly to the next thing. What's the intermediate stage?
Well, I tell people that when you're in your apprenticeship phase, the goal is not to simply learn all the rules and procedures and skills that other people are doing. The goal is eventually you're going to be the one that's experimenting and breaking the rules and rewriting the rules.
Mm.
So I want people in their apprenticeship phase, towards the end of it, to start experimenting, to start playing with their own ideas, to take on a project themselves, to write something themselves. Maybe it's starting your own business, something like that. So now you're not just watching others, you're taking on responsibility, and you also have to learn how to deal with criticism and feedback. You're entering a realm in which you're going to be much more public.
Mm.
And so I just want to make sure, because a lot of people they stop at the apprenticeship phase. They feel like all they need to do is learn what other people are doing and just be good at that. And
Mm.
you can be, and you can be pretty good in life, and you can even, be moderately successful, but you'll never be a master. Masters are people who are very creative, who are iconoclastic, who end up breaking the very rules that they learned. If that's the path you're on, then you've got to start in your 29, 30, 31. You got to start that experimental phase that I'm talking about. And eventually you're going to enter what I call the creative active phase, where you've had a lot of experience and practice, and the mind starts to become creative on its own. It is a very powerful moment, and I take you through that. But that's sort of the intermediary stage.
Okay, so that's kind of 31, 32. It sounds like I'm right on track then.
Yeah.
I've just been writing books and creating programs and all the rest of it. Okay, awesome. So what can I look forward to then, Robert? What's the next stage beyond that creative phase?
Well, the next phase is the ultimate, and in the creative phase, it's not just simply a fact of you wake up and now you're creative. I talk in there about the mind is a muscle that tends to tighten up over time, and oftentimes the things that you learn in your apprenticeship phase, you become a kind of a prisoner of them. So you've got to continually open up the mind and be really fluid and have no preconceived notions about what you need to do. So there's strategies that I have for what I call loosening up this tightening process of the mind. But if you continue on the path, you end up at a point where I believe you are at what I call high level intuition. You have such a command of the field that it's at your fingertips, and ideas come to you out of nowhere, and you've sort of internalized the subject. You almost don't even have to think very deeply. And it's funny, this is something happened to me in writing this book. I was 3/4 of the way through it, and I was really late on the deadline for the book. And the publisher was going to come in, they were coming in and saying, we're going to cancel the project. Or if you don't get the whole book done in like 11 weeks. It was a ridiculous deadline because I had two of the longest chapters to write that were very complicated. And at first I was going to say, no, I can't do it. It's impossible. And it really did seem quite impossible. But then I realized the consequences, and I decided I was going to try it. I had nothing to lose, but I really wanted to see if I could do it. The point of the story was I went through, the work was so intensive, and I was, so deeply inside the subject that I had that feeling of mastery that I was, as I was writing that chapter 6, ideas were coming to me out of nowhere. I felt like I had reached a point finally after so much hard work where I'm not saying I have that in general in life, but for this book, I experienced what that is like, where it's hard to explain, but you're not, you wake up in the morning and you're able to write almost without thinking, you know. And I explain where that comes from. I try not to make it a mystical thing. I can explain to you, I think, where that kind of power comes from and how it comes to the brain and what it means. But the feeling, and I have it described by other people in all different fields, is a really great feeling.
Would you say it's really possible to experience long-term fulfillment without mastery in some area at least?
Well, if people, you can have fulfillment in your personal relationships with your husband or wife, with your family, and that can be a very fulfilling relationship, and that would be fulfillment without mastery.
Okay.
You could be very good at your job, and you're just not ambitious, but it stimulates you enough. You could feel reasonably fulfilled without doing mastery. I don't want to make it seem that your life is useless unless you pursue that. I don't really believe that. But what I do want to tell people is it's not about being a workaholic. It's not about a miserable working night and day, being driven by the ambition. In fact, it's a very fulfilling, exciting process. And the sense, I often tell people, it seems kind of morbid, but imagine that you're on your deathbed and you're thinking back on your life. Do you have this feeling like, I did what I needed to do? I was born with this potential. I didn't get all the way there, but I tried. I did pretty good, and I feel like, I lived my life. Or do you feel like I wasted it? I had this potential. I knew it. I could have written something great. I could have done this or that, and I didn't do it. I think that's not a nice feeling. I think it's a very depressing feeling. And so the sense that you're realizing a part of your potential, I think, is a very fulfilling experience.
Okay, it's really good to hear, though. We're not saying that just because someone's not at a mastery level or is never going to get there doesn't mean their life isn't worthwhile. It's just a different path that they can still be
Well,
fulfilled and they can still be happy. But if you have
and,
that yearning to do something extraordinary or outstanding in the world, then mastery is the path for you.
well, I'll tell you one other thing though. There was a profile that was done of me for the New York Times a couple weeks ago for the new book. They came to my house and they profiled me in my house, and I had had some work done on my patio. Um, I was kind of a little bit of a trick. I was getting the work done so that my house would look good enough for this article. But I had to get someone in who could totally redo my patio and the tile work on it. And we hired this guy who's from Mexico because we liked him. And he ended up being like this complete master craftsman. He knew his job really, really well. For years, he had studied it. And I considered him a master because he'd been doing it for years. He loved the work. Each job was like a challenge to him. And his goal was to do the best possible job. It wasn't he wasn't a money person. Of course, we paid him well, but I could sense he wasn't sitting there trying to gouge us for money. He actually was there every day, really trying to figure out the best possible way to get these tiles done. And it was a very elaborate job we had. And I had him interviewed for the article to show that my concept of mastery isn't people, doing fabulous, necessarily solving cancer or the president of or CEO of a company. This man exemplifies it. He loves his work. He takes it very seriously. He tries to do the best job. Each job is like a challenge. That, you can be a master plumber, a craftsman, carpenter, salesman. It just depends on what you do in life and what excites you.
I saw another interview of you where you said a salesman you didn't consider it to be a true mastery thing because it was too easy. Was that right? Or
I
did I
did.
misunderstand that?
Uh, no, I would disagree with myself on
Okay.
that. Uh, there are people who are there who are master salesmen. They've been doing it for many years, and I know in the kind of jobs I've had where I had to do a little bit of salesmanship, it's something that you can get better at. You do that for 10 years, you're going to know so much about human psychology, about how to close a deal. Um, what I've noticed is people who are really good at sales, and I do consider them masters. Um, it isn't a skill that translates into other things. So oftentimes you'll find in a business a master salesman will get promoted to an executive level position because they seem to be so good, and they're not good at it. Their whole life is selling, and they don't know how to manage other people, or they're not an X's and O's type person about getting things done. It's all about selling, and I can kind of recognize very quickly people who have that mentality. And if you're that mentality, you got to stick with the salesmanship because that's what you're good at. But I would never say that you can't master that. That's a definitely a skill level.
Okay, great. I mean, there's a comedy show about that, right? The Office. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's about a salesman who becomes a manager and then he's terrible at it because the same thing that made him good as a salesman makes him a terrible manager.
That's right. It's a very funny show. Yeah.
One other thing, Robert, a lot of people watching this, I've noticed my audience particularly are people who have already been studying and learning a long time. I don't tend to get many beginners. And a lot of them are at that point where they could, and one could almost say should, be putting themselves out there and starting to create and starting to share and contribute. And what holds them back usually is probably fear. Fear of other people's opinions, which you talked about a bit earlier. Of course, that brings us to another one of your projects, which I absolutely love. In fact, I listened to it only a few months ago, the 50th Law, right? Where you worked with 50 Cent. I must admit, right, this is embarrassing, but I actually like 50 Cent's music. I don't listen to it every day, but if I'm in a 50 Cent kind of mood, I love to listen to it. I always thought it had a certain spirit to it and a certain presence and a certain, magnetic confidence. And then when I read your book, and I was like, well, now I understand why. Okay, this is a person who has, reached a level of mastery in their own way. So do you mind sharing a little bit about that? And then also maybe for those of us watching probably who haven't been through what 50 Cent has been through, which includes you, how do we overcome, as far as I know, how do we overcome that fear of other people's opinions? You know, so if we're not raised somewhere where we constantly have the threat of death, and that hardens us to, you know, someone saying something nasty about us on YouTube or Facebook or whatever. But for those of us who have a more mundane upbringing like myself, what is it that what could you suggest to help us push through into letting go of the fear of other people's opinions?
Well, first thing I'd tell you would be to go read the 50th Law, because that's pretty much.
Well, I'm trying to plug it for you. Yeah.
I'm trying to instruct you in 10 easy lessons, not easy, but 10 lessons. So each chapter in the 50th Law deals, 50 and I co-wrote the book, but each chapter deals with a particular kind of fear, like the fear of having to do things by yourself, the fear of being alone, the fear of criticism, the fear of death, the fear of having to take an aggressive action and maybe hurt some people, on and on. And each one of those chapters, we go through 50's life, illustrate a story in his life where he overcame it, and then we give very clear advice on what to do. But the thing you need to know is fear has a function. You don't want to be born without fear. If you did, you'd cross the road on the freeway and get run over by a car, because you need that fear. And also, having a fear makes you aware of the problem. So it's okay to be afraid. The best soldiers, the bravest soldiers in the world, and believe me, I researched them all for my war book, they all are people who experience deep levels of fear. The story of General Patton I discuss in my book, The 33 Strategies of War. One of the bravest men that ever lived, he had terrible fear in his first battle of the bullets flying, and he felt so ashamed of his fear that he decided he would become the most fearless person. So the lesson is, you have to have that fear. It's fine. You have to confront it and be first aware that it's a problem, and then you can work towards it. And the other thing is, you need to expose yourself to the actual situations that make you afraid. So if you're afraid of criticism, if you're afraid of failing, if you're afraid of people telling you, "Oh, what a loser," you need to actually go right against that current and do something like start a business, write that book, whatever it is, and expose yourself to the very thing that you fear the most, so that you can finally learn that it's really not that bad. It's not that bad at all. You can handle it, you can learn it, you can get over it. People criticize you, you can say to yourself, "I tried it, they didn't try anything. I learned what I did wrong, I learned a lesson." You get some toughness, your skin gets a little tougher, so next time it's not going to bother you so much. You can't spend your life running away from the circumstances that made you afraid in the first place. There's a saying, I can't remember who it's from, but the worst kind of failure is to have never tried something at all. So if you try and you fail, you learn from it. If you never try and you fail because you never tried, there's nothing you can learn from. So we're trying to show you, you need to expose yourself to the very thing that you're afraid of, and see that it's not as bad as you think it is, because fear is a distortion that always exaggerates the dangers and the risks involved. There are other elements, but I'm giving you the short version.
Yeah, and I definitely recommend the 50th Law. Absolutely wonderful. In fact, I listened to that for the first time before I started my own business, and it was very, very helpful in that degree. It seems to be as much a book about leadership as much as it is about overcoming fear. You know, it's about putting yourself out there and leading the way, as it were. Would you agree?
Well, I have a chapter on leadership, which I call leading from, I'm sorry, I keep saying it's we. Leading from the front, which is, I believe, is 50's style. And there are a lot of executives out there. It's a style I think it's really suited to the world today, because we live in a much more democratic environment, and thank God we do. But in that democratic environment, the leader of a company wants to be out there in front, showing that he or she is not someone who sits behind a desk and just makes other people do all the hard work, and they get to take the big long vacations and get the big package, the big pensions, etc. A leader nowadays wants to be out there in the front, taking the bullets, taking great responsibility on their shoulders, not blaming other people, working harder than anyone else in the office, people seeing that the leader is really passionately engaged in what the company is doing. They're out there in the front. And the reason people hide behind the desk is they're afraid of consequences, of responsibility, of mingling with their employees. It's safer and easier to just be in the back and tell everybody else what to do and then blame them when things go wrong. It's a fearful position that a lot of executives use, particularly in large companies. 50 is the opposite. Everybody knows that he works harder than anybody at his business, and he's a tough guy, and he's takes responsibility, and he's very accountable. So I find it's a leadership style that works well because it motivates everybody in the business or in the group to work even harder. If the leader, I tell you in the book and in my war book, a leader sets the tone for the whole group. And it's almost an unconscious thing. It's a mood. And it's funny, if you go to Microsoft, or I'm on the board of directors for American Apparel, or you look at any other large company, the leader sort of sets this tone that just translates through thousands of people. They all follow that in some way. You want to be setting this kind of tone of you're engaged, you're excited, you're working harder than other people, you're out there in the front lines. That's sort of the lesson that 50 gave me.
Awesome, I love that. Would you think that, is there a biochemical basis that you know of that our mirror neurons are trained to imitate the person with the higher status rather than anyone else?
You know, I never thought of that. It's an interesting question. To go into the neuroscience millions of years ago of a leader of a group, and how we responded and how that person set the tone. You know, it's, if you've ever ridden, it's not a great analogy, so excuse me here, but if you've ever ridden horses, you know that the horse feels if you're afraid or if you're not in control. And then, but it doesn't feel it by what you say, it just feels it in your legs. And then if it feels like you're not in control, you can be in a lot of trouble, and the horse will start riding you, kind of thing. And I kind of feel like it's like that in a business. People can sense in an animal way that that leader is fearful, that he or she isn't in control, that he or she's way too emotional, that they don't know what they're doing. People sense it, they pick it up. They also pick up other patterns and ways of doing things. You know, at Microsoft, everyone's a little bit paranoid and a little bit rigid in their cubicle. Go to Google, and they're not. They're kind of a little bit the other way. They're kind of chaotic and anarchic. They reflect the person on top, and it might be a mirror neuron thing. Could write another book on that subject.
Well, yeah, it's just a theory, but if you find out it has some physiological basis, I'll be fascinated.
Yeah.
Well, you've been so generous with your time. I really, really appreciate it, Robert. You've given us some great lessons here today.
Wow, well, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. Excited. Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing your message. I will just do a quick sales pitch for you. If you haven't already read Robert's book, go for it, okay? Mastery is an amazing book. If you are someone who wants to achieve something extraordinary, or if you're just someone who wants to be the best at whatever it is you do, like you say, a craftsman or whatever it may be, it's an amazing guide with so many examples. And Robert, as you can tell, isn't like a rah-rah motivational speaker, but a lot of the stories that he shares are very motivating, you know, and very much you can feel like, I understand, okay, that's where I am right now. And when you have someone you can relate to, because especially if you are on this path of mastery, it's often easy to feel quite lonely, right? It's not like everyone you bump into is also on the path of mastery in our modern world. So it's really great to have all of these, and it took you years to do, I know, Robert, all of these examples from all of these amazing people, both in the past and in the modern day, who are all in the same boat, as it were, as you are. Maybe some further ahead, some further, you know, still behind even, but they're all in the same boat. And, you know, for me, that was really helpful. I just want to say I've been a tiny bit less articulate than usual, possibly, Robert. And the reason for that is because I'm geeking out a little bit, because I'm so happy to be talking to you, because you've been such a role model of mine. And as an excellent writer, you know, as well as someone who, as I say, I see you more than anything as a passionate seeking of truth and exposing of truth. So thank you so very, very much for doing what you do, and thank you so very much for sharing with us today.
Well, thank you. My pleasure. It was great to talk to you. I wish I were in Hawaii. It sounds like you're going to have some fun.
Come on over.
Yeah. Maybe I'll think about it.
Thank you for watching, and I'll put the links directly underneath the video, so if you want to check out Robert's books, they're going to be directly there. I particularly recommend Mastery, and I love the 50th Law and the 48 Laws of Power especially, but that's just my personal favourites. They're all awesome, and see you next time.